Today, Binance's U.S. arm announces a shutdown of USD transfers amid its battle with the SEC. The developers behind Cardano dismissed the SEC's claim that the ADA token is a security. And we asked Josh Frank of The Tie why some crypto tokens are holding steady amid the U.S. regulatory crackdown. Welcome to CNBC's Crypto World. I'm Tanea McKeel. Digital currencies are mostly flat to close out a rocky week for the crypto industry here in the States. By noon Eastern, Bitcoin traded at $26,500 and Ether traded at $1,840. Cardano's ADA token, however, sank by 6%. Despite the turmoil for big crypto exchanges like Binance, which we'll update you on in just a moment, the Bitcoin price managed to lose 2.3% of its value in the past week. Ether fell about 2.5%, and compare that to some altcoins like Binance's BNB token, it cratered 14%, while Cardano tumbled 17%, and Solana dropped more than 11.5%. Okay, let's catch you up on the top stories. First, Binance US announced they will no longer accommodate US dollar deposits and withdrawals starting June 13th. In a statement on Twitter, the firm claimed their banking partners plan to, quote, pause USD fiat channels, prompting the transition to a crypto-only exchange that uses stablecoins for transactions instead. The statement also reassured the safety of customer assets, reiterating Binance US holds a 1-to-1 reserve. This comes the same week the SEC hit the exchange with 13 charges, including allegedly commingling customer funds, misleading investors, and operating as an unregistered exchange. The agency also filed a temporary emergency freezing order on the exchange's U.S. assets. The company suggested it would consider restarting U.S. dollar transfers if it can find more stable banking partners. Next, the developer of Cardano is dismissing claims from the SEC that the ADA token is a security. In the SEC's lawsuit against Binance and Coinbase, the agency asserted that Cardano's ADA was among the tokens listed on these exchanges that should be listed as a security. Input Output Global put out a statement responding to the claim, arguing that the filing contained numerous factual inaccuracies and that under no circumstances is ADA a security under U.S. securities law. At the same time, SEC Chair Gary Gensler is marching ahead with his criticism of the crypto industry. Reuters reported that while speaking at a Piper Sandler conference in New York, Gensler claimed the vast majority of tokens meet the test for being a security. He said not to believe crypto businesses who claim they didn't get fair notice of enforcement actions, and that those same companies may have assumed the risk of enforcement action as the cost of doing business. Finally, as the FTX bankruptcy moves forward, the judge overseeing the case says U.S. courts should have full control over the company's recovered assets. According to Reuters, Judge John Dorsey said in a hearing on Thursday that the U.S. courts shouldn't defer to Bahamian courts over issues like repaying customers. Dorsey said he would retain authority over the $7.3 billion in recovered assets from the debtors. Reuters also reported that a Bahamian court ruling would clarify the responsibilities for both U.S. and Bahamian liquidators. All right, let's talk more about markets for our main story. We told you earlier about how resilient the price of some tokens, like Bitcoin and Ether, have been this week despite the SEC charges against two major exchanges. But what's helping to fuel that resiliency, and can the trend continue as the SEC's crackdown heats up? Crypto World's Jordan Smith spoke to Josh Frank of The Tie for insight.
So Ether has performed relatively well this week in the wake of the SEC lawsuits. It's not as down as some of its so-called competitors. Do you expect that action to continue for Ethereum? Do you think that this is positive news for that network? Is there a longer-term benefit to its price as some of these other tokens are scrutinized for potentially being securities?
I don't think it's a good thing. I don't think the SEC coming out against Coinbase and Binance. Binance, I think they're different. I think we need to separate out the fact that they are very different because the things that are being alleged are totally different. In the Coinbase case, it is a real argument and discussion where Coinbase is saying, hey, look, we don't have any guidance as to whether or not these things are securities. This is just regulation by enforcement. We've been trying to, proactively work with you for years and years and years. Whereas the Binance case is alleging things like what happened in FTX, where Binance is funneling money and trading it themselves and doing all these other things, right? So I don't think, the fact that the largest exchange in crypto, Binance, which at one point had about 90% market share, that's not a great thing for crypto overall. I think Ethereum has outperformed for a few reasons. right? I think one of the reasons is it's not one of the things mentioned as a security in the lawsuit. It's also, one of the, the CFTC has come out and, said they believe that Ethereum is a commodity. And so even between the CFTC and the SEC, there's not necessarily agreement, or there's certainly not agreement in terms of, how they view these assets. But I think, broadly speaking, Bitcoin and Ethereum, I think there's confidence in the market that those assets are here to stay, right? Ethereum has real usage. It has users. People are building networks on top of Ethereum, building applications on top of Ethereum. I don't think there's any sort of, I think what's different about crypto this time versus, a lot of the bear markets we had in the past, I think there's confidence in the market that crypto is here to stay. And Ethereum is one of those assets, right? This might be a setback, but it doesn't mean that crypto is dead. But I think if you look at the market broadly, I mean, everything is held up decently well that wasn't mentioned as a security in one of those lawsuits. So if you look, I'm looking over the last 7 days, Polygon, I think was mentioned maybe down 15%, Solana down 12%, Cosmos down 12%. You had Robinhood say that they were going to delist some of those assets today. And so kind of broadly, things outside of those buckets that were mentioned directly as securities have held up decently well. One thing that I found to be relatively interesting is OKB, which is OKX's exchange token, is also actually outperforming Ethereum. It's only basically underperforming Bitcoin. And we've seen a lot of volume on OKX in the wake of what's happened with Binance. I think as traders offshore look for other venues to execute on.
You mentioned off the top there that the lawsuits that both of these companies are moving through are different. But I think investor reaction to them has been very similar. If they're on these platforms, Coinbase or Binance US, we're seeing increased outflows there. What's the correlation to those outflows and to how the crypto market is moving right now?
I think outflows can be good for prices potentially, or bad for prices. I mean, that's the biggest non-answer in the history of non-answers. But my point is, it's going to dry up assets available to sell. Right. So if people are pulling these assets off exchanges, like if they're pulling Bitcoin, for example, they're not necessarily moving Bitcoin into DeFi and trading it on DeFi. If they're going in there holding it in cold storage, all of a sudden that you have less assets available for sale. And the reason that I say it can be a good thing or a bad thing, it just means there are less, there are less buyers and sellers out there that are moving in the market. There's a little bit there's less volume, right? Which means in an environment where there's less liquidity, prices can move much faster in one direction or another. But I think it's going to be interesting to see whether or not those assets are moved to other exchanges. Because if they're pulled off and they're held in cold storage, I think that's actually a pretty good thing, because that means that people are going to be long-term holding these assets. But they could also just pull them off and then just move them to other exchanges as well.
Is the U.S. in wait-and-see mode? I mean, trading activity here, do you expect it to sort of be on hold until we get some resolution? And to that point, does that mean that the rest of the world sort of moves on and crypto, Bitcoin, Ethereum, any of these tokens really become reliant on what the rest of the world thinks, how MiCA is moving ahead, or how global regulation is moving in Hong Kong or some of these other places?
Yeah, I mean, you're pointing out the exact locations that I would point to, which being Europe and Hong Kong, as well as other jurisdictions. So yeah, I mean, I think, as we think about the market as it is now all of a sudden in the US, Robinhood doesn't have a number of assets listed that were available for retail users to trade on before. There are a number of assets that got listed from Binance US, so they were relatively limited, but Binance US no longer has a fiat on-ramp or off-ramp. So, there's going to be no new cash coming in from a retail perspective. And from an institutional perspective, we're kind of at, a place now where, there's just too much risk for an institution to come in. So there are a lot of institutions that were already kind of steering their ship and moving into crypto. A lot of those guys are continuing to come into crypto. It's not stopping, but we're not seeing like a new wave of institutions coming in. But with that said, we are seeing that in other jurisdictions, right? I mean, Hong Kong has opened up banking to crypto companies. That's not something that's really even happened in the US yet, where they're opening up, their banks to crypto companies to onboard. They're being very welcoming. We'll see how long that lasts, if it continues. I mean, hopefully it's the case that it does, right? They open to retail as well as institutional. And, with MiCA, there's a lot of excitement in Europe. There's also a lot of excitement and belief that the FCA in the UK will also introduce some more positive regulation. And we're seeing that, I mean, reflected in the fact that institutional adoption outside of the US is growing, even though it's stagnant within the US. And we have to remember, yes, the US is, the world's largest economy, and it's incredibly important place, and we do not want the U.S. to fall behind in crypto. We're based in New York City, right? We're rooting for the U.S., but there are billions of people outside of the U.S. that can adopt this asset class and that will adopt this asset class. So I think, it's probably going to be the case that we are going to have stagnation until we get some clarity on either the Ripple case or on, one of the lawsuits, maybe the Coinbase lawsuit, or there's a new regulatory regime in the U.S. Until then, I think, you're going to see most of the activity happening outside of the United States.
Okay, that's all for Crypto World this week, but we'll be back again Monday, so we'll see you then.